Venture capital is a funny business. We are a niche within a niche within a niche. You're not really trying to be contrarian. You want to be contrarian, but only at best 12 to 18 months before your peers.
So 20 years ago, we've already envisioned a future of like we're wearing AR glasses. The date of these fiction coming true really postponed.
When I look across those 150 technologies, I see that changing.
Pieces of advice that you would give to the government?
Ambition. It's a hard pitch, and I don't imagine it to be successful.
You should visit Downing Street more often.
Sure. Exactly.
Welcome to YUVC. Today we're thrilled to feature Lundy-Bryan from Lunar Ventures, a primarily staged deep tech fund out of Europe. As a research partner, Lawrence spearheads the evaluation of over 150 cutting-edge technologies and advises the UK government and the European Commission on crypto and AI. Today we'll cover transitioning from consulting to venture capital research and investing. Do early-stage investors really need research capabilities? And will the skies be filled with flying cars by 2030? We'll also consider if content-driven strategies will be a mode for investors in 2024. It's a packed interview, so don't forget to like and follow us. It's quite interesting that recently I've been having podcasts with actually 3 consultants turned VC. So just start from the transition, okay? You were previously like a Forest and Sutherland strategy consultant, and then head of research at Outlier Ventures, and more recently partner at Lunar Ventures, and also a part-time angel investor, as well as advise the public sector, including the UK government, EU Commission, and World Economic Forum, and on crypto, AI, and digital strategy, all the other stuff. So every VC kind of have a VC that guided them to enter into this industry. So who was that VC that motivated you the most?
I wish I had a good answer. I didn't. It's through the interest in technology, and in my case, cryptography, that led me from a strategy consulting project in about 2014 with Intel. And I was just fascinated in the role of cryptography in, I suppose, holding power to account. I find it one of the most elegant and fascinating technologies, which still is having its impact in society today. The vast majority of our infrastructure is not encrypted. And it will be. So not so much a VC, more than a technology.
Cool. So you surely give a new perspective. And so looking back, so how would you evaluate this transition? So I see from your site, state of the future, like you would have like 5 or 6 pillars to categorize, to describe each of those advanced technology, like being its viability, driver, novelty, diffusion, impact, timing. Like how would you really evaluate your own transition from a consultant to a VC?
I wish that I was as rigorous with my career decisions. I was pretty rigorous in thinking, where do I want to end up in my career, in terms of trying to have maximum impact on the world, not in an effective altruism perspective, like very, very heavily quantitative, but rather knowing that in strategy consulting, very often, even at the most senior levels, you hand off a strategy to somebody that then uses it to make their own decisions. Right. In that sense, you're not next to the decision maker, nor are you making decisions. Now, as a VC, of course, you are helping with capital and with time and with resources. And in some cases, with well-targeted investment at early enough stages, you can help develop or fund an entirely new market or technology in a way that may otherwise not get funded or may even not develop. That's not to say that me as one person within one VC has the power to change the shape of history, but at least you have more of a chance than as a strategy consultant.
Could I say like the pathway of VC is more like down to earth compared to that of a consultant? Like you're really participating in a real project.
I think that's right. And I guess in that same landscape or that same framing, the next step should be a founder to therefore actually make the decision. And I think that's a pathway for many, probably not a pathway for me personally, just because of my personality and characteristics. I've met enough of them now to know that they're crazy, and I'm probably not crazy enough. Actually,
I've seen like a common trait that 3 of you consultant turned VC have. Like you wouldn't categorize yourself as the most entrepreneur in this field. Basically, like you chose a consultant path in the very beginning, and maybe that years of training really framed you, like how you behave, how you work on stuff, and how you understand this world.
Yes, I entirely agree. My background at Frost & Sullivan was maybe slightly unusual in that I had a combination role as an analyst and a consultant. So the analyst is internal, the person coming up with market sizes or market trends or dynamics being in the ecosystem. And then the strategy consultant part is taking that work and then translating it for one specific company, right? Now, I always preferred the research part of that. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's one level of abstraction above, but I think that's relevant for what I do now because I find I'm biased, or at least I focus a lot on market in a way that many don't. And I focus a lot on timing because to be good at being a market analyst, you have to really understand growth rates because that's the most important factor, determinant factor for any investment, for any company. And if you understand that the market's growing by 4% or 7% or 10%, it makes a material difference in the investability of something over 5 or 10 years. And I think that's one thing I bring to my particular role. It's less important to the venture capital industry, but it's something that I'm pretty versed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the two industries depict a contradiction between a gut feeling driven and a mythy, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive framework or number crunch dominated lines of work. So so some guys will say, I'm not really a number guy. I've got really a good gut feeling. So you don't need much time or like efforts to do due diligence in especially early stage companies. Right, but like while others, for example, like you would run a very detailed and delicate analysis and then give a conclusion afterwards.
I think that's right. I think that it's definitely doing the work. It's definitely not gut feel. But that being said, we invest pre-seed and seed where there's a very paucity of data. So I would be making it up really to say that I believe some new technology will grow at 12%, not 6%. I would be making it up. So in some cases it's useful, but in others, that gut feel or that sense of seeing lots of markets over time develop maybe gives me a better gut feel. So you do have to go with gut a little bit more, than I'm comfortable with, but that's the business.
So actually, I've got a past experience, I would like to share with you. So I literally offended two consultant turned VCs who are from McKinsey, like in an interview. Maybe because the investment stage of theirs is more like post-Series A. So that might count as a factor. During that interview, they asked me about like a typical consulting style question, which really I didn't really like. So that's kind of like, that showed a mismatch of me being a candidate and with those kind of PE-like VCs.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that is something I talk about a lot. I'm not convinced VC is a single unified industry. And maybe we should distinguish early stage from later stage. And later stage, coming from investment banking or PE, is a perfect background. But when you are pre-Series A, I wouldn't say it makes the job harder, but you have to unlearn a lot of things. And you have to work under much higher degrees of uncertainty. It's closer to recruitment, in my estimation, which is to say there's a problem statement in the world and you need to hire the absolute best founder to solve that problem. And you look at characteristics and you look at founder profile and team. So it's much more on team and then much fluffier, much more subjective. And maybe some consultants for which have worked, on the later stage, maybe it's not a good fit.
So as you mentioned, unlearn. So anything else for you to unlearn as a consultant turned VC?
You have to unlearn the skill or the desire to reduce uncertainty to further and further degrees. When I was working with a client, it would be a bad project if you were to not give a very clear, the vehicle to infrastructure market is growing by 6% and therefore you should invest X amount of your budget by 2027. That's the sort of recommendation that would be strong. But my desire to achieve that level of specificity in my work today is suboptimal, because you can never get there.
Can I take an analogy like it's like climbing the wrong hill, right? So you're trying to achieve the local maximum. So there are so many pillars for potential success for a startup, especially in a very early stage. If you're a number crunch guy, so you might be really diving into the number pieces, but like you could neglect more important directions.
Yes, that's right. And I think comes with experience, and it comes with data points. So, for example, if you take a company in a direct air capture space, for example, you may want to look at the technology, the underlying science. You may want to look at the commercial viability, the current market, the costs, the competition, and maybe the team. And there's 4 mountains, to use your analogy, 4 hills. With experience of the market, you may understand that the greatest risk factor is not the science, is rarely the team. So all you need to know is all your diligence process could be 100 hours on cost, with a few hours on the other things. You may spend all the time on the science, or in my case, all the time on the market, not realizing that the actual biggest risk factors are something else, some other mountain. So I think that comes with time. And I certainly agree that we as a fund are heavily biased towards the technical side of things. We're a deep tech fund. We're a heavily technical team with lots of PhDs. So we love digging into the technology. And I love digging into the market, but there are other funds that look only into the team, right? Or only into the economics. And so lots of different styles. And I think it's just a case of realizing that trying to understand within each market which is the most important risk factor.
So is research-driven VC investing a necessity? If so, why don't those research-driven VC is not at mainstream, right? So it's kind of, I would say, still a contrarian view. And so why don't those too long didn't read VCs prioritize research as of today?
I think it gets to the early stage and late stage. I think late stage, Series A plus, when there's data points, you already have $1 billion market, let's say, and you already have Gartner and Forrester giving you growth rates, and you don't really need your own opinion. That might be a bit unfair, but you need it less. You need to know who the players are in the market, how fast the market is growing. You speak to all the founders and you make a bet on what you consider to be the most likely success. So what research do you need to do? Now, then the question is, why are there not all early stage VCs with a research focus? Well, there are some. And in some of the best cases, it is the investor who is also, to some extent, a researcher. They think that having a dedicated researcher is not the right structure. And maybe that's because the interface between all the research work and the investor just isn't clean enough. So I think there's lots and lots of funds who would say, we do very, very good research, but we don't have a head of research. And then there's maybe what we decided to do at Lunar, and there are others, Lux Capital with Sam, there's Atomico, there's numerous others that have hired very, very strong researchers. That typically is, for one hand, being thought leaders in a market. In the case of Atomico, being the fund to think about for European venture capital. Yep. And that can be a lot of thought leadership and brand building, and that's an important part of research. Or you can do something closer to what we do, which is the research you do at very early stages is to have an understanding of a market and a technology above and beyond a particular investment. So in the best case, and why we think having a specific role like mine works, is from the first call with someone doing direct air capture or vertical takeoff and landing, I, and therefore the team, have done the work to understand the market. We've done X number of hours. We know the core problems, the competition. We don't waste time looking through the deck and then doing research afterwards. We have a view and we ask them the hard questions, and we can move through to diligence and an investment faster.
Yeah, so basically you're having a knowledge base for your own organization.
Well, that's exactly right. I call it epistemic infrastructure, but also more than that, knowing what not to invest in or what not deals to look into. That is equally important as knowing what to invest in, because it's a resource management tool.
So as a former strategy consultant, like how would you iterate investment thesis? Like, so can we do a step-by-step walkthrough? So if I'm one of your analysts, so really interested in vertical takeoff and landing, how will we really iterate this thesis?
Good. So first thing to do is to understand the very broad landscape. This is often the hardest thing. What is the problem it is solving? Point-to-point transport. So instead of just doing a market analysis of vertical takeoff and landing, looking at the Kitty Hawk and looking at Lilium and looking at the players within that market, say, what are the other ways to move from point to point? On the ground or in the air, whatever it might be, logistics, or so moving things around or people around, and to start at an extremely high level. What is the problem it's solving? And then what I would do is I would look at the market, the overall market of moving people and moving things around, look at some projections, have like a base level of understanding. You put vertical takeoff and landing here, and then you want to understand the bigger TAM, the bigger bubble that it's in, and then understand within that, what are the main drivers and trends. I think that's one of the values of being a market researcher previously, is to really do a lot of desk research, to interview as many people as you can. Depends on timing, but minimum of 10 people within the industry and the ecosystem. Ask them broadly similar questions. What are you working on? What are the main trends you're seeing in the industries? What things in the industry do you think people are doing wrong? What are the wrong paths? What path would you take if you had unlimited capital? Yeah. And there's a whole series of questions you can ask. If you're doing your job correctly, come out with a few key further areas to explore, or avenues for which you think maybe the market is taking incorrectly. For example, when I've done some interviews, say something along the lines of, we believe that overall cost needs to be decreased by 10x for it to be viable for moving people around. Maybe you've addressed 3 to 5 potential themes, and within those themes you then do more interviews to get down to what I would consider to be an investment thesis. And a thesis needs to be specific enough that you can go out and build a market map. But within that map, you'd be able to look at one particular segment that you think is valuable. Then you would contact all of those companies proactively. And that's how you build from a pyramid all the way to an investment.
Yeah. Kind of try to find the undervalued part of the value chain.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of that process is trial and error, because so oftentimes, 4 out of 10, you may end up being too late. And then, 2 out of the 10, you may realize you're too early. And there's nothing. And so you're left with 1 or 2 where you realize you've got your timing right, you think, and there are companies that are fundable.
Great. So could you share like one of your proudest research-driven theses?
I guess the Ethereum blockchain, in 2015 or 14, whenever I came up with the thesis, broadly speaking, the market understood blockchains as a way to transact assets or cryptocurrency. There were very few people in the marketplace saying, what if machines or objects could transact? In fact, weirdly, back then there was a project by Samsung called Adept, where they had done a pilot where a washing machine paid for energy using probably Bitcoin. And I believe, and funnily enough, I still do, but I got my timing very, very wrong, that one of the core value propositions of a blockchain overall will be machine-to-machine transactions. So machines paying for resources, whether it's energy or compute. And we made a few investments at the time. This is at Lunar Ventures in that particular space, and that led to still probably to yield maximum success. Maybe in the way investing in Nvidia in 1999 was still a good investment, but not as good as holding it for another 20 years. It's something where you have a data marketplace for these things. So data gets uploaded to a marketplace, and people can buy and sell data freely. And we invested in Ocean Protocol at the time that was building that tooling, and I believe that broadly machine-to-machine communications as well as data marketplaces were two of my best thesis, albeit very early. So the question is it bad because it was too early or good because it was right? That's a really interesting question, which I don't have a smart answer to.
Like aligning the consensus is a big part. So like, yeah, so for example, like publishing your research or publishing your content is also a way, an effective way to align the consensus. So like, what could be a unique selling point of a content-driven VC as of this year and onward? So there's so many like content-driven VCs, or they label them at least.
I don't know. I'm not convinced there is, actually. My overriding thought is I don't know who decided VCs should opine on everything, because VC is a very niche and specific business, and we likely have knowledge and skills in one particular area, but to look to VCs to understand the macroeconomy or society at large, I think is a peculiar thing. The idea of content-driven is suggestive of the fact that VCs have something to say that people want to hear, right? They have a unique voice, a unique insight for which there is an audience. I don't believe that that's true. I think in many cases, VCs with the best returns may be very, very good at managing money and making investments. Whether or not they're the same people that are able to have a unique voice on a market, I'm not sure. I don't believe I'm creating content per se. I'm doing my job, and in the process I'm writing, and then I publish that because it makes me a better thinker. But it's not a KPI for me. It's not a primary brand building exercise. At least what I've noticed in the last few years is those that have a specific content strategy, it looks like people are finding things to write about. And if that's the case, why would I read it when I have a multitude of other things to read from non-VC, from everyone in the world, or just watch Netflix?
Yeah, so it's like you're a senior associate, you've got an OKR, and you have to write, for example, like 6 articles on Medium, right?
I think it's been bad, and it'll get worse because obviously we now have tools to make writing easier, or at least to converge to some average mediocre quality. And that means more and more things will get written, and actually cutting through the noise will be harder and harder. And for many, it just will not be worth it. You know, to try and say something new about quantum computing might very well be pointless. So to answer your question, like, what does a good content driven VC look like, you know, going forward? I would strongly argue that maybe looking at it as content is the wrong way to do it. If it's part of your process, like it is with mine, then maybe publishing is a good way to share knowledge. But if it's specifically desired to build a brand or to hit a KPI, it's probably not worth the ROI.
Yeah, I guess like each fund has to really target its own audiences, right? So are you really targeting the general public? Then just send them memetics, right? And there are cases like VC sending memetics becoming a real VC fund. If like there are funds or VCs like you who are really just publish as you write. So you're really attracting those like-minded people who can really express their own, say, like they're key opinion leaders in their field. You're doing really a true interview, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting, huh? Like that, because if you measure the KPI as a brand readership, it's audience capture, right? You then think, oh, I should create a meme. That would be the easiest way to get the views. And you lose track of who your audience are. Now, for huge mainstream generalist funds, maybe a meme is effective for what they want. But you're right. You know, we are a niche within a niche within a niche. Private equity is niche. Venture capital is a bigger niche. Within that, early stage is a niche. And within that, we do deep tech. So the idea that we would have millions of views is not going to happen. At best, we should be getting 10,000, I don't know what the ceiling is, of people genuinely interested. And yeah, you're right, targeting those. So I think that's at least how I think about my work. I think about it as I am a curious person that has expertise in a few areas. And so I do research to do that. And there must be other people in VC or out of VC that are similar. And that's who I write.
You published constantly with your, let's say, famous The State of the Future Substack, as well as a site. So could you like give our audience like an executive summary of the state of the future in 2030 or 2050?
I'm strongly of the view that we should be far more optimistic than we are. And sitting here in the UK as a continually declining empire with less and less power in the world, I think we're minded to pessimism. And maybe even in Europe, some pessimism. But I think when you look across 150 technologies, as I did, you start to see growth rates which surprise even me. I always use this example. I think it's the best one. Mm-hmm. Nuclear fusion. Now, I do not believe, and this is maybe in contrast with many of my peers, I don't believe it's a good investment for a venture capitalist today, partly because the timelines to a commercial nuclear fusion reactor are, in my estimation, 15, 20 years away. Yep. So we have a 10-year fund. So I'm not sure about the returns, but let's say, what does the world look like in 2050? Well, it has nuclear fusion in it. Commercially viable nuclear fusion with clean, abundant energy. With that comes the single biggest determinant for our future is going to be our ability to create clean and cheap energy. Everything is downstream energy. So our ability to compute things, our ability to create quantum computers, ability to have large language models, our ability to have AI on smart glasses and in biosensors and in our body digestibles will be all dependent on our ability to create energy. I'm extremely optimistic in our ability to create cheap, abundant energy. We are on the precipice, at least within a 20-year period, the precipice of 10 to 100xing our ability to create energy. Then that is an enabler of all of the wild futuristic things that we want to do. I would argue that our sort of secular stagnation, I subscribe to the view that since the 70s, broadly technological progress on most fronts, other than digital tooling and the internet, has been stagnant. In terms of aviation, in terms of space exploration, in terms of energy, has been stagnant. And that, when I look across those 150 technologies, I see that changing. I see that atoms and deep tech is starting to undergo the same growth trajectories that we saw with digital technologies. And that'll happen in the next 20 years. And it makes me very, very optimistic for my children.
Yeah, I guess people's depression came from the view of, so 20 years ago, we've already envisioned a future of we're wearing AR glasses, we're having better AI models that help us to work more efficiently. We envisioned that we would have nuclear fusion in 17 years. As the time passes, so the date of these fiction coming true really postponed.
I'm biased, but much of this is political will. Society or the government will get in our way of progress. I believe that there is a really, really important role to make sure that we are diligent and careful with progress, and that there's a role for legislation and there's a role for government in managing fast growth. I would argue that the dial has been far too much towards risk-averse nature, far too far to slowing this down. But biotech and our ability to reprogram genetic code or biology is one of those areas for which my optimism and pessimism fluctuates wildly, in that we're giving the tools to remake biology. And that could be good for food in terms of creating abundant, cheap food, but it can also be great for disease control and longevity and extending human lifespans. But equally, we have to really worry about bioterrorism and a lot of ethics around that. And that is a role for government, the ethical side of things, or at least a role for society that may be mediated by government.
So as an advisor to the UK government, so you've also met the Prime Minister of the UK at Downing Street. What will be the single most powerful and important pieces of advice that you would give to the government in terms of technology adoption?
Ambition. It's a hard pitch, and I don't imagine it to be successful. So in your framing of the question, would it be successful or not? Unlikely. But what I would say is many of the challenges of utilizing or getting the benefit of technology, especially AI, and we could think about synthetic biology, we could think about new forms of energy, is a lack of political will at a very senior level. And there are countries around the world for which they have the political will, whether it's through ego in many Middle Eastern countries, and that's fine, or for a desire for legacy, whether that's the strategic thinking with many Asian countries in terms of wanting to be at the forefront of technology. Many of the challenges of the UK, and I would broaden that to Europe, is just a lack of ambition, a lack of desire and willingness to put a flag in the sand and to say we want to lead on X or Y, because many of the challenges are around funding these tools or getting the talent. All of these issues are solvable when there is political commitment. So if I were to advise the UK government, I would advise them, because I'm biased, on trying to become a semiconductor leader, not on fabrication, like Taiwan or Samsung or Korea or Japan necessarily, but to become a giant when it comes to IP.
Yeah, so that might also be like one of the choices that the UK government has to make to stay ahead, I would say, like in the global race of technology.
Yeah, how to stay relevant. I think for the fact that globalization was the prevailing narrative for a very long time, and the idea of an industrial strategy, the idea of supporting particular technologies was seen as picking winners. It was seen as a negative. My instinct is to disagree. My instinct is to say, not that we're smart enough to pick winners, but that you should support industries where possible. And I think that could be through money, but it can also be through visa programs to make it easier for professors and students to study here, and then to give visas for staying and contributing, or entrepreneurial visas for people in particular industries. There's lots of things that can be done outside of just money, and we don't do enough of them. So I think if I was to summarize, let's get back to industrial strategy. Let's have a viewpoint on the future and allocate resources accordingly, because many countries around the world have started doing that 10 years ago. We're 10 years behind.
So coming back to the state of future. So after reviewing over 150 technologies, which technology would you categorize as the most underrated, as well as which one would be the most overrated?
The most overrated is always hard, because as an investor, it's just much easier for me to not invest in that space rather than specifically say, everyone else is wrong and you shouldn't be touching this. But that said, of course, there are many technologies for which I think the amount of capital invested combined with media coverage exceeds the current growth rates. I think for that, nuclear fusion would definitely fall as an overrated technology. And sadly, for me, I think Bitcoin would also fall into that category, but are likely in the longer term have a bigger impact. But in terms of undervalued, assisted reproductive technologies are up there. The simple fact is our total fertility rate is a civilizational crisis. I don't know if this is something that venture capitalists need to worry about necessarily in terms of returns, but certainly if I say everything is downstream of energy, everything is downstream of humans to work, or at least to be part of the labor force. Not in the extreme long term, where hopefully we can have AI, trillions of agents, create an economic value, and the requirement of humans can be less. But within the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's really important that we enable people to have more children. Now, there are things we can do on the tech side with better computer vision for IVF, maybe even synthetic embryos. There's certainly a lot of tooling that we can create to make it easier for children to be born and thrive and survive. And it's an area that's chronically underserved. So I would focus on that area. Although my caveat is to say many of the big interventions will have to be on the policy side. By that I mean, tax, housing costs. The other one maybe that's more relevant for us as investors maybe is something close to brain computing interfaces, which is very much a sci-fi dream. When I say undervalued, it's a tricky one because yes, there's Neuralink and there's Elon Musk and there's many people that know about brain computing interfaces, but I'm more interested in something along the lines of brain recording, better imaging modalities for brain activity, We're getting smaller and smaller FRMIs, and we're getting much clearer imaging, better, more granular, cheaper imaging. And I think our biggest constraint for understanding the brain is data. Many of the breakthroughs in AI are to do with areas for which we have lots of data. I believe that if we can find cheaper ways of getting brain recordings, even at low fidelity, there'll start to be extraordinary development, the sort of same level as we saw with ChatGPT or with Stable Diffusion. And a lot of that will look like brain recording. Will look like we're able to wear and understand how our brains react to certain stimuli, which may have tremendous downstream consequences for medicine, therapies, silent virtual reality movements, a whole bunch of things. That's something I'm keeping my eye on because we're seeing progress, but it's flying under the radar.
Kind of, yeah, like the progress of understanding our own brain really falls behind compared to like for us to understand the universe.
It's remarkable. You speak to, I did some diligence on BCI, and you speak to neuroscientists at the cutting edge of the field. They'll quite explicitly say we do not understand how the brain works at any fundamental level. And the idea that we can recreate it, or that we can create artificial intelligence that mimics it is light years away. But I believe that we probably have algorithms. We're close enough to have the algorithms. We just don't have the data. And data collection is a scaling challenge. It's a cost challenge. And I think it's something that can be solved. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, maybe with the joint efforts, especially from the government, I was saying, like.
There's something that could be done, exactly. And again, it's one of those things like fusion. Fusion's much harder, actually, for numerous reasons. But it's an engineering challenge. It's not a science breakthrough. Actually, like fault-tolerant quantum computers, for example, are a science problem. But imaging of the brain is very much is an engineering problem, and it's a scale problem. And if we've been good at anything over the past 50 years, it is getting computers and miniaturizing them. And I continue to believe that if we can miniaturize sensors and put them on people's heads, that's the way to be getting towards brain-computer interfaces.
After publishing The State of the Future, so have you had any unexpected takeaway?
Actually, what I learned is there is much less in the realm of science than engineering. That's a bias because by the time there's a breakthrough, then it will reach state of the future. But in lieu of there being a breakthrough, I can't study that. State of the future is things that are plausible, and really they're an engineering challenge. And so I was surprised. I thought there would be more crazy things decades away. I was thinking, space elevators. But the more you look at these sort of technologies that seem always destined to be further and further away, you realize, in fact, much of it is an engineering challenge. It's a long, hard challenge, but it's engineering and money more than it is scientists in a lab making breakthroughs.
So it's actually, kind of like good news for the VC industry.
And then get timing right. So the one thing is I'm more optimistic, but then the other thing is the timing. Venture capital is a funny business because you're not really trying to be contrarian. You want to be contrarian, but only at best 12 to 18 months before your peers, because you're part of the stack. So sure, we might believe in a particular technology, before others, before there's data. But if there's no data in 18 months, then a seed or a Series A investor is not going to invest. So yes, we can say, we really believe in, colonies on Mars in 10 years. We think that that's viable. But if our peers later on don't believe in 18 months, then it doesn't matter what we believe. Yes, State of the Future is able to uncover, I think, themes that others aren't looking at. But then much more of the job is persuading other parts of the capital stack to either agree before there's data, which is hard, or I have to get my timing exactly right so there is data, 18 months later, or some proof points or demonstration that enables others to give money to that same startup. It's a tricky one because I'm more optimistic in the long term, but in the short term, realize venture capital is very, very tied to a very short time frame.
It's not a game for everyone. Who do you envision to be like in 5 years?
I don't have a good idea of that yet, and maybe that's a good or a bad thing. I've never had a good plan for my career. It's always been sort of serendipity.
Yeah.
But that said, I do see a interesting intersection between politics and technology. And I'm very, very interested in why there's been an ever-increasing gap between politicians that serve us and broadly technology, at least in Britain. And I think there probably is an opportunity to be involved at a policy or politics level to advocate for technology, but not as a deep technologist that can't explain to laymen or politicians, but someone who can translate. And so as I think it goes back to what we said right at the beginning, what is the journey? The journey of me is to have maximum impact. And you could think strategy and consulting, not much impact. Venture capital, more impact. What's the absolute maximum impact you can have?
Yeah.
I don't know. King of the world is the last thing, I guess, but that's probably unlikely.
Cool, interesting. So yeah, you should visit Downing Street more often.
Sure, exactly.
So last question, I guess. What is meaning of life?
To find the joy in moments. They're not anything larger than that. They're not anything grander. I never look back and say, I have achieved X or I am Y. It's always just those tiny little moments. And so I've come to realize, I think, that the more that I enjoy the moments that I'm in, I get out of my head and I can be present in moments, I'll probably at the end of my life hopefully have found meaning in that in somehow.
Thank you very much for this answer. It resonates with me very well. So yeah, so let's schedule for another call in 5 years. Maybe you are a politician.
You'll have to speak to my PA probably to schedule that.
Yeah, something like censor our content before publish, right?
Exactly. It's a very funny point, right? I may be, but then equally I may have realised that if you think about some very, very successful venture capitalists, they have not gone into politics. I'm thinking Mark Andreessen, I'm thinking Peter Thiel, well, even some founders, they haven't gone into politics. Bill Gates, and actually, they've decided not to. Maybe they've realised that you have less power as a politician, and then maybe you have more power as a well, I'm not sure actually, philanthropist or a backer of ideas. But let's wait until I've made $1 billion first, and then I can make that decision. Whether or not. So that's a long way to go.